Greetings, Miskatonic Repository. My name is Heinrich Mohr, and I want to talk to you about the scenario Aurora Blue. I want to talk about why it made me feel uncomfortable. In a good way. If you don't know, Aurora Blue is one of 3 scenarios included in Chaosium's collection No Time to Scream, 3 Evenings of Nightmares. The premise of Aurora Blue is that the investigators are a band of US Treasury agents setting out to raid an illegal gin distillery hidden in the mountains of Alaska. All types of horrible things are waiting for the investigators that I won't spoil for you because I do want you to go out and buy the book and read the scenario. What I will say is that the book has an interesting mechanic by which the investigators experience flashbacks that helps explain why they have a personal stake in the outcome of this investigation. And honestly, that's an interesting enough mechanic that I could talk about just that. But that's not why Aurora Blue challenged me in the way it did. That was the result of all of my own insecurities. Because I was a white game master running a scenario featuring investigators who are all people of color.
Aurora Blue contains mature themes above and beyond those usually featured in Call of Cthulhu. Specifically, the scenario depicts culturally sensitive material, including racism and racial conflict. The 4 pre-generated investigators for this scenario are Bureau of Prohibition agents from marginalized backgrounds. Underpaid, underappreciated, and often overlooked despite their talents. They are desperate to close this case before new agents sweep in from the continental US and claim the laurels of the investigation as their own.
Let's backtrack. I was one of the playtesters for Aurora Blue, by which I mean I wasn't a player participating in the game, I was a keeper running the scenario. The author Bridget Jeffries is a great friend, and I was lucky enough to have her ask me to playtest it. And I did, running it for 2 friends, one of whom was white and of European descent, like me, and the other African American. Let me tell you, it felt weird. Being the white dude running the scenario about black treasury agents in the midst of segregation didn't feel comfortable. I felt like I was telling someone else's story that I had no right to tell. To add insult to injury, I was telling it to someone who did. And there were other mistakes. Unintentionally, the players had selected pre-gens that meant our white player was playing the investigator who was the boss of our African-American player's character. We also tried to do voices the way we would in other TTRPGs, but they just felt terrible and wrong, because we kept worrying we were getting too close to turning the investigators into caricatures. I also overanalyzed everything in the scenario. What did the author intend by including a reference to blackberries? Is there a hidden meaning between the investigators being from marginalized backgrounds, raiding a distillery that's run by also people from marginalized backgrounds? Yeah, it turns out that just because the scenario had us playing people of color, doesn't mean everything in the scenario had racial symbolism. I'll be forever grateful to my friends for joining me in that experience, and for overlooking the super awkwardness I'm sure I exhibited throughout that session. But here's the thing. Yes, it felt weird. Yes, I made embarrassing mistakes. But that lasted maybe 30 minutes? After that, and even during that time, most importantly, me and my friends had fun. We had fun because we like Call of Cthulhu. And we like Call of Cthulhu because we like to play RPGs that allow us to experience perspectives we would never otherwise have the opportunity to know, even in a limited fashion.
Aurora Blue mimics the real and immeasurable obstacles often faced by marginalized people. Investigators must deal with racist NPCs, come face to face with culturally prejudiced imagery, and must suffer painful flashbacks drawn from their backstories that depict the bigotry that they've experienced.
I remember after the session giving Bridget a call to talk about the playtest. We probably chatted for over 2 hours while I was just walking back and forth around my kitchen, giving feedback, asking questions, and talking about the experience we had. That was when I realized one of the most important parts of the scenario, and the perspective of a group of Call of Cthulhu investigators we rarely get. The scenario gives investigators every reason to run away. Most of the investigators I've created and played in Call of Cthulhu, who also, not coincidentally, were Caucasian, would have run, but the investigators in Aurora Blue didn't have that privilege. If they run, they will be seen by their superiors, their government, and by society at large as proof for the racial prejudices held against them.
The investigators are in a position that limit their ability to flee. Their careers, reputations, and potentially the progression of any marginalized person who aspires to follow in their footsteps rests on their success.
Playing an investigator who doesn't have the choice to run away from the supernatural horror because of the very real human horror that would be inflicted on them and anyone who looked like them, now that's a horror story. Ours is a white hobby. Most of us, me included, wish that weren't so. POC authors like Bridget Jeffries and Chris Spivey are doing a lot to help change that through stories like those in No Time to Scream and Harlem Unbound. But as those POC authors have rightly reminded us, until we as white gamers demonstrate the value we profess to see in these products by not only spending our money on purchasing them, but also by running them and promoting them, the stories of people of color will not make it to the shelves of storefronts that continue to cater to a predominantly white audience. So, pick up No Time to Scream, run Aurora Blue, and maybe be uncomfortable. It's well worth it. Until then, stay tuned for more.